After the fall in Mobile, Alabama, 1974, our band was fired 2 nights after we started at the airport Ramada for lack of Southern rock songs, and simultaneously dropped by Dick Dollar, our agent back in Denver for the previous 18 months across 20 states. I can't do anything for you now, and if you don't play the 3rd night, they aren't going to give you $1. I made a call to Don Sheets in Cincinnati, who said, "Come in when you get back." Tail between our legs, we drove north, trying to keep hope alive. And sure enough, not giving up is the only way things get better. Sheets was the oldest established booking agency I knew of, but never had occasion to work with. In 1970 to 72, when Jack Lohman and I stayed busy behind our own efforts, and the publicity gained from my novelty tune, Hard to Be Hip, getting some airplay, getting fired for not having any Southern rock songs proved the obvious truth that music taste is regional. While we stayed up pretty well learning new hits from the radio, the songs were picked with an eye for easy listening rock, and the lounge band boat had sailed on that, even while disco was already making inroads into what our audiences wanted. Also obvious was the essential skill of reading the room and how change never stops, and staying ahead of change is crucial. I called ahead to Carol, my former girl who is still living in our old apartment in Covington, and after a lot of begging for help, she agreed to put me up while we were in town. The other 3 members of the band found beds with the bar owner I had worked for as a single, and who had fronted the money to record Hard to Be Hip, a kinder soul I never worked for. Then we met with Don Sheets, who liked us, especially ginger-haired Gloria singing lead and playing light lead licks on guitar. After the Fort Mitchell, Kentucky Holiday Inn debacle, we trusted him and were grateful when he booked us into Leominster, Mass., where we were still somewhat viable as a music commodity. We continued traveling the Holiday Inn, Sheraton and Ramada circuits in Massachusetts, New York State, Syracuse and Rochester, West Virginia, over to Ohio, a total of 26 states in under 2 years. Much time spent replacing drummers, and in Atlanta, at the Shallowford Road Ramada, we found a good one and an audience, so 2 weeks extended into 6. Life on the road continued with the parade of motel chain lounges melting into one another. Drinking, always a factor in bar life, had gained prominence in my daily routine. Mark and Gloria found a new guitar player to replace me, and after 2 weeks in Winston-Salem at a Sheraton, they fired me from my band for drinking in late '74. Placing an ad in the paper, I quickly found 2 young men to join me, located a new agent, and continued driving around the country until I fell off a chair adjusting stage lights in the darkened lounge before our first night, breaking my collarbone in Pensacola. We finished the 2 weeks in December, me with a sling that I removed to play the guitar for 4 hours a night, 6 nights a week. Luckily, the strap went over my good shoulder, so with booze and codeine, I got through it somewhat amazingly. But that was it. I sent the 2 boys home and returned to Atlanta to heal an overdose on morphine in January of '75, moving in with a nurse who had heard us in Atlanta. Morphine. I was lost in space for 2 weeks. When I recovered, I relearned much of how to play guitar and found a solo gig in a beer and oyster bar in Ansley Mall that lasted 14 months until Dante gave me a trial shift based on the recommendation from one of his regular singers who had caught me at the oyster bar, which turned into 26 years of steady part-time work. Dante became, as he was to many others, surrogate father as well as employer. For small dough, he rented me a tiny one-bedroom apartment in Midtown, where he owned a 16-unit apartment building. In 1980, Dante closed his underground restaurant and opened a new one in Buckhead, building from the ground up. I was the first act to play on the wharf there, and business picked up steadily from zero. Dante's jazz trio, headed by pianist Paul Mitchell, remained the draw they had always been in underground from the late 60s. In November of 1981, Sheila walked in to meet some friends from the office where they worked. I felt her walk through the door without seeing her, as my back was to the door. She hated me on sight, but I was smitten. Stalked her for 3 months with weekly calls. She would lie about being busy and hang up on me. Finally, she agreed to go out with me, according to her, to give me a bad time and get me to stop calling. Instead, we stayed up all night talking over a large jug of cheap wine, and in the morning, I got her on my motorcycle, drove her back to her apartment. She called her mom, who was in Hawaii for a Girl Scout function, told her she was moving in with that asshole who had been calling her. If that works out, we'll get married at Thanksgiving. And Mom, he doesn't look good on paper, and he is 13 years older than me. Her mother said, don't do anything. I can be there in 3 days. We married on November 27, 1982. Soon after, Dante gave us free rent when Sheila took over managing the 16-unit apartment building he owned in Midtown. Saving the rent money, we were able to put away enough for a down payment on a downtown condo in 1987. In 1988, we made a trip to Clay County, NC, love at first sight during the long weekend at a friend's place with a view of the foothills, and we knew we had to move.